And that is why Nasser Hussain decided to bowl first at the Gabba. And this all, of course, reminds me of Hit Wicket, which is a mobile cricket strategy game that is all about making those tough decisions. Who do you want to send in as an opener when the asking rate is climbing? Do you go for the big hitter or the steady accumulator? Me, I like to throw in someone a little bit unorthodox, a bit of a wild card like the general. That keeps the opposition guessing. And what about the bowling attack? Do you unleash your express pace early or hold back for the death overs? I'm always tempted to bring on a mystery spinner in the middle overs and just try and break a partnership. Hit Wicket puts you in the captain's chair. You draft the squad and select the batting order and even decide when to use those game-changing abilities. Do you burn your 2x ability to chase down a big total or save it for a critical moment later on? It's strategic, it's addictive, and it's more nerve-wracking than facing a show-up act-up bouncer. Give it a go. Download Hit Wicket and see if you've got the tactical nous to win.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Overthrows podcast. I'm Behram who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me is Estelle Vasudevan, who you can find at Estelle_Vasudev, the number one. And the both of us are over here today to discuss South Africa's thumping win over Sri Lanka. 233-run win, in fact, in Durban, which has allowed South Africa to go 1-0 up in that two-match test series. And not a good start at all, Estelle. And I suppose the biggest headline for this particular test would be that Sri Lanka were bowled out for their lowest ever total in test cricket, which is 42.
Yeah, it was an insane kind of inning. 78 minutes, I think it lasted. Not even 14 overs, which is incredible to think about, right? And if I'm not mistaken, it's the first time they've been bowled out for a sub 50 score in test cricket as well. So a new, like a real low for Sri Lanka. They just couldn't. They didn't take the time to adjust, and just I don't know. It felt like they didn't know what they were doing because there were so many aggressive shots. And this is not them batting first, right? South Africa batted first, struggled with the movement and, the conditions. And then you come out and put on an innings like that. I mean, I understand South Africa have really good bowlers, right? Rabada was great. Jansen was great. But at the same time, like some of those shots, I don't know if you've seen some of the replays of those shots. It's exactly what you would tell a team not to play like if you're playing in conditions where the ball is moving. So not a great start for Sri Lanka. And of course it has, we'll discuss it later, but it has repercussions, right? In terms of the World Test Championship as well. So not the best start to a series that means a lot for the team.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you obviously mentioned how Sri Lankan batters applied themselves really poorly in that first innings in particular, right? How much of it would you say, or do a percentage breakdown for me? Because the track and the pitch was clearly challenging, right? So there was a bit of that. And then there was a bit of good South African bowling and then poor Sri Lankan batsmanship. So if you had to split the percentage between the three, how would you do that?
Well, in my opinion, of the top 7 batters, 4 of those batters got out playing shots they didn't need to, right? Playing away from the body, way away from the body. Like, I mean, I'm sure many of you saw Angelo Matthews' dismissal, where he's basically playing a ball that's about, a foot away from him. And it's almost like you're guiding it to the slip cordon. So if I take only the batter, only the guys who are there to make the runs, I would say 80% of that, 75 to 80% of that was bad shot selection. It is true that South Africa bowled well. Like, you have to give them props for that. But when you look at the scorecard and see 13.5 overs, you know that it's not been just about the bowling, right? There's been some poor shot making. So, 75 to 80% of that was bad shots.
Damn, that's a high percentage. I obviously watched a bit of this test match, but you followed it very closely. The one bit that I did watch was Marco Jansen, right? And he pretty much had the best red ball game of his life. I would like to go out on a limb and say that was probably the case. 7 for 13 in the first innings, the second in the game, and then 4 for 73 in the final innings. Ended up with 11 wickets out of 20, which is phenomenal. And he broke records because his 7 for 13 came in 6.5 overs, which is now officially the quickest 7 for in the history of Test cricket. He tied Hugh Trumble's record from God knows how long ago, early 1900s or what.
1904.
1904, yeah. So it's been a hot minute, right? And Jansen, of course, is tall, generates a lot of bounce. Yeah, so what would you like to say about that, terrific performance?
Yeah, he's one of those guys who I feel like South Africans themselves are kind of unsure about. Like, he's got the talent, right? He's
Yeah.
got the talent. He's shown that he has the talent. But you don't know whether, okay, if you're playing him as your kind of number 7, what's he going to deliver? But I mean, that type of performance, if he's able to do that regularly, I mean, there's no problem playing him at 7, right? Because he's going to
Yeah.
offer something with the bat as well. I thought he bowled really well in both innings. He bowled, I think, seven overs on the trot, kept it really tight. And the odd one that was away from the body, of course, the Sri Lankans couldn't resist the temptation. But I thought he bowled with a lot of discipline. And I think that's the notable point there, is that, he wasn't trying too many things, because sometimes when the conditions are so favorable to bowlers, there is that temptation to try a lot of things, right? But he wasn't trying to do too many things. He kept the ball in that channel outside the off stump and was rewarded.
It's interesting, right? You mentioned how his discipline and accuracy was one of the main factors that contributed to his success, because Marco Jansen is someone who we know who has a tendency to be quite erratic, right? We know he's talented, we know he's tall, we know he's quick, all of those things. And we know he has long levers and can hurt you with the bat as well with his big hits. But this is a bit of a revelation in his career as well, where he's stuck to his guns, bowling that channel, and he's ended up with 11 wickets. And I mean, that first innings spell, right? Sri Lanka's first innings, 7 for 13. That's just 6.5 overs. It's insane. Like, I saw a Crick Info, I think it was a tweet or something, in which they had described it as a blink and you'll miss it performance. That was literally it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I mean, it was the way Sri Lanka batted. South Africa didn't really have to work hard. Like, as good as Jansen was, he did only have to bowl those 7 overs, right? There was no trying to wait him out and maybe, kick on or whatever. None of that happened. But again, you have to give credit to the guy who's performed so well, right? Because like you said, that erraticness has kind of been what has planted doubts in people's minds about his ability. But he was really consistent with his lines and lengths in that spell.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we have this really interesting stat provided by Shoria Patak over here in the comments. I'll bring it up. He says Jansen now has 60 test wickets at 20.05. So he has got a 0.01 decimal point advantage over Jasprit Bumrah, which is insane, right? Because Bumrah is 20.06. Of course, he's played more tests, a lot more tests. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty much as good as it gets for Marco Jansen. That's a test match he'll never forget. And just to kind of come back to Sri Lanka's batting, right? Of course, when you're out for 42, there's nothing to write home about. But when they came out to bat in the 4th innings, we saw some fight. Chandimal scored 83, DDS scored 59. I think Kusal Mendes also scored around 48. So going to, I can't even say the name of the next venue, Jikubera, I think I've got it, but Jared has the correct pronunciation. What are the sort of positives that batting lineup can take? Because this is the sort of loss that really jolts you as a side, especially when you are, in contention for a potential World Test Championship final qualification berth. So, how will Sri Lanka, like, how should they bounce back? What are the positives that they can take from that 4th innings batting?
I think obviously those 3 batters that you mentioned will take some confidence in the way that they played. But that first innings performance, I should also say, no practice game ahead of this series. Probably one of the most important series Sri Lanka have played over the last decade or so, right? Because they know they have a realistic chance of making it into the WTC final. It's not just like in the last cycle as well, they were in contention until the last series, but it was more or less win 2-0 in New Zealand or you're going home, which was unlikely to happen, right? Here they came in with a realistic chance of doing that. And that 42 all out is, I think, would have hit them hard, because it's not just, as I mentioned before, it was not just, this phenomenal bowling performance. I mean, I think we can think back to a couple of times Sri Lanka have been bowled out cheaply very recently in limited overs cricket. But in those circumstances, there were records like, most amount of swing in the last decade and stuff like that, right? Where conditions were really, really tough. But this performance will definitely jolt them. In the second innings, they should take confidence from those knocks, particularly Chandimal, as we've spoken about before. He's batting at number 3, not a position that he's really featured in much in his career, right? He's
Very true.
made that kind of sacrifice so that Kusal Mendes can drop down the order. So that would give him confidence. Though there is a number of things I think that should qualify that success. One is that conditions for batting were much, much better, because I mean the Sri Lankan innings
course.
finished so fast by the time South Africa got 300 plus and Sri Lanka came out to bat, the sun was out, the track had really flattened out, so it was much better for batting. And the other thing I would also like to say is that one thing Sri Lanka seems to be having a problem with is the conversion rates from those batters, right? Chandimal got 80 something, DDS got 50 something, Kusal Mendes, I think at number 7, you almost excuse the 48, right? But certainly guys like Dinesh Chandimal would be disappointed that they are not able to kick on and make a bigger score, particularly, as I said, because the conditions were not as difficult as they were on day 2.
Yeah, that's fair actually, because they did ease up big time. Of course, that's how we saw South Africa, declare their innings in the third innings, and then Sri Lanka also did all right in the fourth. But yeah, let's shift our attention a bit towards South Africa. Now we'll come back to Sri Lanka and talk about their bowling and everything. But I want to talk about the other South African. Oh well, there are 3, but the second South African who had a brilliant Test match. It was their captain, Tiny Temba, with a mighty performance, right? What a display of batting. 70 in the first innings. Of course, he was dropped and dismissed off a no ball, so that happened. But he did ultimately end up with 70, where no one else could cross 50. And then in his second dig, he comes out and scores 113. And Temba Bavuma, doesn't really score Test hundreds all that frequently. He's played 60 games. This was his third Test 100, and a lot of people wanted him out of the side as well. So this was a really interesting arc that built up, and he ended up as the most successful batter in this Test match. So runs were at a premium for quite a while, and Temba Bavuma scored 183 of them. So that's quite amazing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are going to talk about those 2 chances, right? Because he was dropped on 1 by the Mutkarnaratne, and then later,
Yep.
I think probably before he crossed 20, he was caught off a no ball. But I
Yes.
think, you have to also consider that that's not in his control, right? What's in his control
Absolutely.
is how he controls the innings from that point onwards. And I thought he did a really good job. I thought that was the difference. That made a huge difference, because the knock he played in that first innings took South Africa from what should have been a sub 150 total to 190, right? Let's just, hypothetically, if they were bowled out for, say, 120, then 42 looks kind of all right. You still can come back from that, right? You have like a 80 run gap. But because of the way he played, and he did get some support on the other end in the terms of like small cameos, but the way he controlled that innings from that point where he was dropped, from the point where he was caught off a no ball, I think it shows character as well. And of course, in the second innings, it was another good knock, not a great strike rate, and that's exactly what you want from players in conditions like this, right? You're not looking for guys who are necessarily scoring 30 or 15 deliveries, right? Not from your batter, like your proper batters at least. You're looking for guys
Also,
who are willing to take their time. Yeah.
just a quick stat over here. I think Varun is providing these, and the look and feel has just changed. He's mentioned how Sri Lanka had a false shot percentage, or false shots per dismissal, of 4 in the first innings, where the average is usually 10. So with the quality of bowling, you expect a team to be bowled out for 120, and 42 is very unlucky. But based on what I'm hearing from Estelle, Varun, is that Sri Lanka were playing at a lot of shots they weren't supposed to be playing at. So I mean, there's that. But anyway, carry on about Temba.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, you kind of want your batters to not be overly cautious, but also understand that, look, you don't have to be going at 4 or 5 runs in over in that situation, and to take their time and get those big runs. And I thought that's what he, and I'm sure we will talk about Stubbs, did in that innings. They put the game beyond Sri Lanka.
Absolutely. Like I know I was at the studio, the E11 Pro Sports studio, where I was watching this game in passing, right? I'm doing other work and then I'm watching this game and then I'm doing other work and I'm watching this game and I'm like, okay, all right, 100 for 3, 150 for 3, 200 for 3, 250 for 3, 300 for 3. I'm like, when will it stop? Declare, South Africa. Like, they're already dead. They're not chasing 400. Just declare. But yeah, of course, Temba Bavuma and Tristan Stubbs were at the helm. And they completely battered Sri Lanka out of the game in that third innings. And of course, Temba, is almost like a veteran at this point, in his mid-30s or whatever, has played a lot of Test cricket for South Africa. And even if he hasn't scored a lot of tons, we know that, he's used to this environment. Tristan Stubbs was playing his 6th Test match. In his 5th Test match versus Bangladesh in Chattogram, he scored his maiden Test ton. And he doubled down in this game by scoring 122 in the third innings. And I feel like he's a very versatile cricketer because you didn't see him go, berserk in this innings. Of course, he plays his shots and everything, but the Tristan Stubbs that I knew was a limited overs player who could whack it, right? And who had impeccable range. And I thought was, someone who South Africa could rely on in limited overs cricket for the next 10 years. Recently, I'm starting to get convinced that Tristan Stubbs might be the real deal in an all-format player because in Test cricket, he's gone back-to-back, 2 tons in 2 games. And this was, sure, not a pressure or a knock under pressure, but, a knock nonetheless on a surface that wasn't entirely easy to bat on. So I feel like, South Africa might really have, they might have a gem at their disposal in Tristan Stubbs. And I don't even know what his ceiling is at this point.
Yeah, the funny thing is, wasn't it earlier in this Test Championship cycle where we were basically saying South Africa have given up on Test cricket, right? They sent like a second string or third string team to New Zealand. They don't really care about it. And then you have guys like Tristan Stubbs, who you rightly said were kind of pigeonholed into this. He's a T20 cricketer, right? He's a basher.
Or even ODIs. I was fine with that. But I just didn't know he had this game that could translate at Test level.
And then when you watch him play, I thought he was really, I thought he was pretty impressive in the first innings as well. He didn't make much, but I thought he looked good. And in the second innings, like you said, he did play his, wacky shots, the reverse laps and, that sort of thing and the flamingos and all of that, right? But it's a temperament, I think, that really shone through because I don't think he bats at 3. Does he bat at 3 in domestic cricket? I'm not too sure about it.
Yeah,
but coming
I'm not sure
up
about that either.
In that position for a guy who a lot of people believe is like this, basher, and to play innings like he did in this test and as you mentioned the game against Bangladesh, really, really impressive. I think it's only because countries like South Africa don't get a lot of tests in a year that we don't see that kind of immediate growth from players like him, but he was really impressive throughout the game.
Yeah, no, I feel like, this next little while in Test cricket, South Africa will play him a lot and we'll get a better idea of what he's capable of. But from what little I've seen, I can see him kind of succeed at Test level because it's not like he gets impatient, right? That's the big part. Sure, he will play his funky shots, but he does have that knack of kind of occupying the crease as well. And on top of all of those great things, he's got that stash, right? And it's hard to go wrong when you've got a mustache like that. And the hair. So he's one of those characters like you see him once and you won't forget Tristan Stubbs. And I like that in sports people, even though that has nothing to do with his game. But anyway, both of those guys, Temba Bavuma and Tristan Stubbs, were massive positives for South Africa behind Marco Jansen. Coming back to Sri Lanka, right? Lots of indiscipline in the field. Of course, we spoke about that no ball and drop catch by Karunaratne in the first innings. I think there were like 3 to 4 drop catches the next time Sri Lanka came out to field as well. South Africa also dropped a few, but their chances were tougher, where Sri Lanka dropped some regulation stuff. And on a tour like this, where, you have the odds stacked against you, and you need to deliver at least 1 win out of 2 in order to stand a chance for qualification of the World Test Championship final. That many drops won't cut it.
Yeah, it's a strange thing because Sri Lanka's fielding, for the large part, has been good. I think early in that test, barring Karunaratne's drop, right, they took every opportunity that came their way. Coming to Mendes took a couple of really good catches. Angelo Matthews held on to one that was really low. So the catching was relatively good in that first innings, barring that drop by Karunaratne. But like you said, there is no room for error, right? When you're in a situation like they were in that second innings, you know you're already way behind the game. Your only opportunity of staying in it is getting South Africa out for, 200 or something close to that total. So in situations like that, and I don't know whether this is, because I watch a lot of Sri Lanka cricket, but you get the feeling that there is also mental side that needs to be worked on. Because if you look at overall in limited overs cricket as well, Sri Lanka will be good throughout the year. They'll be competitive. They play well in bilaterals. And then come the World Cup, that first game, that start of a series, it seems like there's always something, catastrophic that goes on. Similarly here, the build-up was big, right? I mean, I know we didn't kind of preview the series, but back home, the build-up for this series was big because Sri Lankans know that this is a real opportunity to get to the World Test Championship final.
And they'd done it before, right? Not too long ago. 2019 is not too long ago, when Sri Lanka became the first Asian team to win a Test series in South Africa.
Yeah, and I mean, that was a far more stacked South African team as well, right?
Yes.
Sure, some of those players were nearing their retirements, but on paper, this is an inexperienced South African side. So there was a lot of expectations, and then to start like this, I think to me it says that there is also kind of something that needs to be worked on mentally. I'm sure there are processes in place from the management as well, but those kinds of things is the indiscipline, as you mentioned, is what you can't afford. As well as Lahiru Kumara bowled in that first innings, we're always going to talk about that no ball where he got Temba Bavuma out, right?
Yeah, no, and I mean, I'm not going to say that the dropped catches are the reason Sri Lanka lost. 42 all out is the reason Sri Lanka lost. But generally, even in the second test, if they get those opportunities, which aren't half chances, they're full chances, you've got to make those stick, because South Africa at home is still an exceedingly difficult, team to overcome. Also, this other really interesting stat that Surya Pathak has shown us is that Tristan Stubbs averages like around 51 in first class cricket in South Africa, which is a tough place to bat. And there are only 11 triple centurions in South African first class history, and Stubbs is one of them. Dezorzi is another. So yeah, I mean, I didn't know these things, right? Like about Tristan Stubbs. So it's new to me that he's come to Test cricket and literally, he's taken to it like a fish takes to water, and back-to-back hundreds, as you've pointed out, a phenomenal first-class record. So I see him now as someone who could serve South Africa across all three formats. And, going into the latter half of the 2020s, I don't think we'll be seeing a lot of cricketers who will play all three formats for the international team. So that's why I feel like he becomes a very, very prized asset for South African cricket. And I mean, the IPL contracts will just get bigger as well as time goes on. Anyway, we spoke about the batting, we spoke about the fielding, Sri Lanka's Estelle. Let's talk a bit about their bowling. First innings looked really, really good. Asatha Fernando has been one of the most successful Asian bowlers in Test cricket in the last little while. He picked up 3 for 44. Lahiru Kumara, the enforcer, once again, as you mentioned, we might just remember that no ball, but picked up 3 wickets for 70 runs. Was expensive, but was incisive, which is what you want. And then Prabhat Jayasuriya picked up 2 wickets each in both innings and is now the second joint fastest to 100 Test wickets. He could pull off a Yasir Shah if he plays for another, I don't know, 4 years, I would say. Is that fair?
4 years in Gaul.
4 years in Gaul, absolutely. But how would you assess that bowling performance? Because, of course, the surface had eased out and Sri Lanka dropped catches in, their second innings with the ball. But in the first innings, there was a time where it felt Sri Lanka might roll South Africa over for a sub-100 score.
Yeah, I thought they were really, really good in that first innings. Like, if you compare the two innings, Sri Lanka and South Africa, I feel like South Africa didn't play badly in the first innings, but they got good deliveries early on that were moving off the pitch. And, that's how the dismissals came. Whereas, like I mentioned, Sri Lanka were a bit indisciplined. Kumara I think we spoke about him a lot during the England series as well, right? About he's that enforcer factor. I don't know, someone probably who knows a bit more about fast bowling can explain it, but he's bowling 140, 145, which is quick, but it's not like you have quicker bowlers than that in world cricket, right? But it feels like he really hits the bat hard, and that makes him feel that extra bit quicker. And Sri Lanka cricket have, I think, ensured that he doesn't play limited overs cricket because they want him to be fit enough to complete a test. He's had a couple of occasions where he's bowled a few overs and then gotten injured and had to walk off. So they've kind of consciously made that decision that at least for the time being, they want him to be a test specialist. And so they're going to give him that space to kind of rest and really build his body up to that level. And I think over the last two series overseas, he's shown that he can be a massive asset. I think he started his test career off in South Africa as well and was really, really impressive back in 2016.
Yeah.
And he's come back and he was really, really good in that first innings. Second innings, I wouldn't read too much into those figures because they got like 14 overs between innings, right? To kind of pick themselves back
Yeah.
up and start
also
bowling
true.
again.
They must have been really
No
tired.
break. Yeah. No break, and then having to be on the field for that long. And these are the things that could potentially impact the second match as well, right? Because you've got your three premier quicks having to kind of bowl through basically 2.5 days of play because your batters had such a short innings.
And especially with Kumara as well, he has a history of breaking down, so that is absolutely like as far from ideal as one could imagine it to be. And Asatha, I mean, has kind of been that consistent performer. So I expect good things from him in the second test as well. What about Prabhat? I didn't watch his bowling too closely. Sure, 4 wickets out of 15 isn't like great, but he's still, a weapon that Sri Lanka have up their sleeve. And surfaces have started to take a bit more turn in South Africa due to climate change and all of that stuff in the last little while. So do you see him potentially playing a role if Sri Lanka are to bounce back in, however the hell you say, GQEBERHA?
That's an interesting one because I think he didn't bowl badly, right? And it's kind of very similar to what happened in England as well, where he didn't bowl badly. He picked up a couple of wickets here and there. And in conditions like this, you're not necessarily expecting your spinner to run through sides, right? Even the guy who's second fastest to 100 wickets, you're not expecting him to kind of roll through sides in conditions like this. So I think his role is holding that end up and providing some relief to the quick bowlers so that they can rotate around him. What's interesting to me is if you look at that England series where Sri Lanka played 3 tests, in the third test they opted for 4 quicks and left Prabhat out, which a lot of people, including myself, were kind of questioning, right? Because you feel like he's that guy who will bowl 50 overs from one end and then you can rotate your quicks around him and kind of get the results that you want. But also that was the test that Sri Lanka won because their four quicks kind of did the job. So I'd be interested to see actually what happens in the second test. I wouldn't be surprised if they left Prabhat out despite him, not bowling terribly, because they've got the likes of Kasun Rajitha, Milan Ratnayaka on the bench as well, who would, if conditions are similar to Durban, really enjoy how things will go because both of them move the ball as well. Milan can offer a little bit with the bat. So I wouldn't be surprised if they opted to leave him out. The only thing I would say is, spinners for Sri Lanka have done relatively well in South Africa, at least over the last series. And if I'm not mistaken, the conditions for spinners are also better in these two venues, right? Historically. So that might alter their thinking as well.
Yeah, I mean, I expect him to play. And if you remember the time or that series that Sri Lanka won in South Africa in 2019, the Test series, the spinners had a huge role to play, Mbuldenni in particular. So, I mean, I still feel like it's not beyond Sri Lanka's reach to win the second Test match because Test cricket has been on crack in 2024. And it's something that I almost expect at this point that there will be some result here or there which will surprise everybody because that's been the template.
The only thing with that though is if you look at if you look at these kind of the crazy tests year we've had, it's like once a team has started badly and started this badly, coming back has been really tough. And I think we on Murali Pod, what we discussed was starting well. And I thought Sri Lanka, that's kind of one thing that you really need to do if you want to, even if they'd lost, if they'd started well, like they played well and lost, they would have taken something to the second test. Now it's like it's a 42 not out, sorry, all out, and you have to kind of come back from that. In surely some of that is going to be in your head, right, when you go for the second game.
Yes, that's true. But let me kind of play devil's advocate over here, right? If I've got this correctly, Sri Lanka need to win all 3 remaining test matches in the cycle. They need to defeat Australia 2-0 in their own backyard, like in Sri Lanka, and win this test match versus South Africa. So that does 2 things. A, it, motivates your players that, okay, this is it. We've got to give it one final push. And also, in a weird way, it takes the pressure off of you because now you kind of know that this is it. This is the final shot that we have. And maybe that allows Sri Lanka to play more freely. But then to your point, is playing more freely the answer? Or is being more circumspect the answer, right? Like, it's a confusing one because South Africa is the hardest place for batters to go and bat, particularly Asian batters, because of both the lateral movement and the bounce. And when you've got Marco Janssens in the opposition team, then both of those things could really hurt you. But I do still feel, Varun has it, that winning all 3 games gets Sri Lanka to 61.53%. 2 wins and a draw get them to 56.41%. Judging by the fact that there aren't many draws anymore, I feel like 3 wins has to be the way forward. And it's not like beyond the realms of possibility or probability that they defeat Australia 2-0 at home. It could happen, right? It is a possibility. This is the test, the South Africa one. This is what it all boils down to. It's kind of a shootout.
Yeah, it is between those 2 teams, isn't it? Because South Africa has now moved up to number 2 in the World Test Championship rankings. So they know they've got a massive shout, and their advantage is that they're playing Pakistan at home as well.
Yes.
So they know they've got, conditions within their control in the last 3 tests. For Sri Lanka, I mean, after watching India-Australia, you would think that, Sri Lanka, the possibility of a 2-0 win over Australia and Sri Lanka is it's possible. But like you said, Test cricket has been weird, particularly with touring sides, right? Like, I mean, touring sides have been really good during this year or so. So, like you said, it's a make or break situation. They lose this, they know their chances of making that final are pretty much gone. So it could, like you said, motivate them. My concern is, like I mentioned before, it seems like they've struggled when they've been put under that kind of pressure where, if you win this, you're through, that kind of thing. It seems like they've struggled. So I think there's a huge job for Sanath Jayasuriya and Dhananjay De Silva to do between the two games to get them up mentally for that second one.
Yeah, that could either galvanize them or it could make them crumble under pressure. Both of those things are possible, right? And only time will tell how Sri Lanka fare in that second test match. But I mean, South Africa, from their perspective, they've got 3 tests remaining. They're favorites in all 3 of those test matches. But there's always rain around in the Rainbow Nation, and South African cricket is always also kind of hurt by rain time and again. And a single loss would slightly complicate things for them, right? Very slightly, because this now should be a World Test Championship final, which should feature South Africa. And it's so crazy to me when I think how they could have really cemented their spot had they played their first team versus New Zealand. But because of the SA20, that wasn't a thing. Because had they won a test over there, they probably were already in the final, right? So it's nicely set up. And this series in particular is very, very, central with respect to World Test Championship qualification, because a lot can happen here on. Like, there's so many teams which are vying for a spot. Here's to hoping that we get a good competitive game in which both sides fight tooth and nail in Port Elizabeth. There, I'll use the old name.
I think we probably should learn the pronunciation, right?
Yeah, it's got a in it. I know that. Yeah. That's why I can't even attempt to pronounce it, because Jared does it really well. He loves to pronounce. He picked this ground in his best or favorite venues, remember?
Yeah.
Did he not?
Yeah.
Quite sure he
I
did.
think so. At least it got a mention for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, that kind of wraps up our Overthrows podcast. Estelle, quick prediction. 2-0 South Africa, 1-1.
I'm sorry. I think it's going to be 2-0 South Africa.
Yeah, I think conventional wisdom definitely suggests that South Africa are going to win the second test match as well. But I'm not going to put, I will say that Sri Lanka, I think, do have a chance. Let's just see how they start that test match up front. You guys let us know your predictions in the comment section below. That is all from this episode of the Overthrows podcast. And just a quick reminder, you can go to goodareas.co and bookmark that webpage. That can prove to be your one-stop shop for all the work that we do as part of this team, whether that be written content, podcasts, or videos. And yeah, we'll be back soon enough, whether it's a live, a quick picks, a footmarks, a red inker. We're churning out constant content for you guys. And thank you for all of your interactions in the comments as well. And yeah, have a good day. That's all from us for today. Goodbye and have fun, guys.
And that is why Nasser Hussain decided to bowl first at the Gabba. And this all, of course, reminds me of Hit Wicket, which is a mobile cricket strategy game that is all about making those tough decisions. Who do you want to send in as an opener when the asking rate is climbing? Do you go for the big hitter or the steady accumulator? Me, I like to throw in someone a little bit unorthodox. A bit of a wild card like the general. That keeps the opposition guessing. And what about the bowling attack? Do you unleash your express pace early or hold back for the death overs? I'm always tempted to bring on a mystery spinner in the middle overs and just try and break a partnership. Hit Wicket puts you in the captain's chair. You draft the squad and select the batting order and even decide when to use those game-changing abilities. Do you burn your 2x ability to chase down a big total or save it for a critical moment later on? It's strategic, it's addictive, and it's more nerve-wracking than facing a show-up act-up bouncer. Give it a go. Download Hit Wicket and see if you've got the tactical nous to win.